You know exactly what this is about. Not because someone told you, because you've lived it. You've been doing the work, showing up, being patient, being reasonable, being the one who tries. Not in a loud way, you're not the type, just quietly, consistently, making the effort. Adjusting when things felt off, staying when others would have walked, holding your tongue in moments when you really didn't want to. Months of this, maybe years. And somewhere in there, a question started forming, one you haven't quite been able to name out loud. Why doesn't it feel like it's landing? The respect doesn't come. Or it comes sideways, conditional, inconsistent. They're only as long as you stay agreeable. The moment you relax the effort, something shifts. The moment you need something back, it tilts. You feel it. You just can't explain it without sounding like you're keeping score. So you try harder, adjust more, give more of yourself in the hope that this time it tips the balance. It doesn't. Here's the thing nobody says directly. The trying is the problem, not the care, the trying. The visible, consistent effort to earn something that should never have required earning in the first place. The reason it backfires is documented, consistent, and completely counterintuitive. Once you understand it, you won't go back. You've been in situations where the more you gave, the less it seemed to matter, where your reliability became the reason you weren't taken seriously, where someone could count on you so completely that your presence stopped registering as a choice and started registering as a given. A given doesn't get respected, it gets used. Maybe it's a relationship. You're the one who texts first, who remembers things, who tracks what they mentioned in passing 3 weeks ago and shows up with exactly the right thing. The more you do, the more it recedes, the less they lean toward you, the more they lean back, comfortable, settled, certain you'll still be there. You make yourself available and what comes back isn't warmth, it's assumption. Maybe it's a workplace. You're the reliable one. Never complain, always deliver, always there. You've covered for people who didn't cover for you, stayed late when nobody asked, taken on extra when you already had too much. And you've watched with a frustration you can barely put into words as someone with half your track record walks in with twice the presence. Doesn't apologize for wanting things, doesn't over-explain, doesn't perform likability, just moves through the space like they belong there, and gets taken seriously for it. Or maybe it's closer, a friendship that runs on your fuel and has for a long time. A family dynamic where being consistent made you invisible. A pattern so familiar you've almost mistaken it for personality when really it's just a strategy that stopped working years ago and no one told you. The details are different. The mechanism is identical. Consistent effort signals need. Need signals instability. And instability, socially speaking, repositions you. You stop being someone to reckon with. You start being someone to manage. This isn't about being cold. It's not about performing indifference. That's the wrong takeaway, and it never works. People can sense the performance immediately, and a performed version of not trying is still trying. It's about something much more fundamental, something that can't be faked. There's something worth naming about what this costs, not just socially, but internally. Because the trying doesn't only fail to produce respect from the outside, it slowly erodes something on the inside. Every time you over-explain and the explanation lands flat, something registers. Every time you show up with effort and it's taken for granted, something notes it. Every time you adjust yourself to fit the room and still feel like you're somehow in the wrong place, the same quiet recording happens. You don't always consciously think, that didn't work. But the nervous system keeps score. And over time, the pattern produces a specific kind of fatigue that most people can't quite name. It's not the tiredness of being too busy. It's not burnout from overwork. It's the exhaustion of continuously performing a version of yourself that was built to be acceptable rather than real. The energy required to monitor how you're landing, to adjust in real time, to make yourself available in ways that feel strategic rather than honest, that cost compounds quietly. Until one morning you wake up and feel hollowed out in a way that sleep doesn't fix. Because you've been working hard at the wrong thing. The energy that went into securing approval was supposed to go into living, into building something, creating something, being fully present in the moments that actually mattered. Instead, it went into the management of perception, into being palatable, into making sure the room was comfortable with you. And the room took it. Rooms always take what's offered. That's not a judgment on the people who took it. Most of them weren't thinking about it at all. That's exactly the point. There's also a specific pattern worth naming about the moments right before you stop trying, because most people have had at least one of these, even if they didn't recognize it at the time. There's usually a point of collapse, not a dramatic moment, a quiet one, where you simply ran out of the energy to maintain the performance, where you were too tired, or too hurt, or too preoccupied with something else to keep monitoring the room. And so, for a period, you stopped. Didn't reach out first, didn't over-explain, didn't make yourself available in the usual way. Not as a strategy, just as exhaustion. And something shifted, maybe slightly, maybe significantly. But the response from the other person, or the room, or the situation was different than you expected. More attention, not less. More respect, not less. Something closer to genuine interest in where you'd gone. Most people write that off, put it down to coincidence or timing. And then they gather their energy and go back to the old way because the old way feels safer, even when it doesn't work. But that moment, that accidental pause in the trying, was data. Clear, consistent data about how the dynamic actually functions. The trying was suppressing the very response you were trying to produce. And the moment it stopped, even temporarily, something real had space to emerge. Most people spend their whole life not understanding that moment. They experience it, discount it, and return to the pattern that wasn't working. They assume the pause was irrelevant, that the other person was just in a better mood, or that something else changed. But here's what actually happened. For the first time in a long time, you stopped broadcasting need. You stopped sending the signal. And without the signal drowning it out, the other person could finally feel something they hadn't been able to feel before: the actual weight of your absence, the actual value of what had been there. You can't feel the weight of something that never lifts. That's not a philosophical point. That's the operational reality of how respect forms in any relationship, in any context. It requires the possibility of loss. It requires knowing, even below conscious thought, that the presence in front of you is there by choice, not by obligation or anxiety. There's a concept that social psychologists call reactance. Susan Fiske at Princeton spent years studying the mechanics of social perception, specifically the signals that trigger respect versus the signals that trigger dismissal. Her research kept returning to the same finding. People do not respect what they can fully predict. Predictability feels safe. But safe is not the same as valued. What the social brain involuntarily assigns weight to is what it cannot fully anticipate, what might not always be there, what has to be earned on both sides. The moment you become entirely predictable, reliably available, reliably accommodating, reliably there, you stop registering as someone with inner life, with limits, with preferences that actually mean something. You start registering as a role, a function, something the environment can rely on without having to actually engage with. Roles don't get respected. Roles get filled. Elaine Aron at Stony Brook spent years studying highly sensitive people, individuals who process social dynamics at a depth most people never reach. One of her consistent findings: they tend to overfunction in relationships. They feel the imbalance so acutely that they compensate so quickly and so thoroughly, they accidentally create the very distance they were trying to close. The effort to secure the connection is exactly what makes the connection feel less secure. Read that again. Because that's the thing the whole first half of this has been building toward. What you're communicating beneath the generosity, beneath all the real care, is that you need this more than they do. And that signal, once it's out there, reorganizes the entire dynamic. Not because people are calculating, not because they're cruel, Most of them aren't even conscious of it, but the nervous system reads it. It always reads it. Here's where most content in this space gets it completely wrong. They tell you the answer is detachment, strategy, learning to perform a kind of indifference that makes you seem less available, less invested, less easy to read. Pull back, wait longer before responding, make yourself scarce. All of that is just trying in a different costume, a more sophisticated costume maybe. But the same thing underneath, managing your behavior in order to produce a specific response in someone else. Your self-worth is still contingent on their reaction. You've just moved the dependency one step to the left. The real shift, the one that actually changes how people experience you, is internal. And it starts with an honest question. What are you actually trying to get? Not the surface answer, the one underneath. Because there's a reason this feels like it has to be earned, like your presence requires supplementation to be enough. Nobody overfunctions without a reason. It happens because at some point, often very early, often before there were words for it, someone absorbed a lesson that their presence alone wasn't enough, that love, attention, belonging, safety, these things had to be earned, maintained, kept alive through continuous effort. That's not a character flaw. That's an adaptation, a very intelligent one at the time. The child who learned to be useful, to be easy, to be good, that child was reading the environment correctly and responding to it. The strategy worked. It kept things stable. The problem is it doesn't stay in the past. It migrates forward into every relationship, every dynamic, every situation where something matters enough that you can't afford to lose it. The old pattern activates automatically, below conscious awareness. You start working for something that was never supposed to require that kind of work. And the people around you, without knowing any of this, without meaning any harm, respond to the signal rather than to you. They respond to the trying. There's a figure worth sitting with here, Ernest Hemingway, and not the version most people know. He was an American writer, won the Nobel Prize in 1954. By the end of his life, one of the most recognized literary voices of the century. What most people know is the output, the prose, the novels, the iceberg theory, the idea that the power of a story comes from what's left out rather than what's put in. 7/8 beneath the surface, only the tip visible. The first decade of his career, though, that part gets skipped. Hemingway spent those years in a state of real professional insecurity, writing letters to editors, looking for approval from mentors, explaining himself, defending his choices, trying to prove he deserved to be taken seriously by a literary world that stayed consistently cool toward him. It was exhausting. And it wasn't working. The work itself was good. Clearly, obviously good. Several people around him could see it. But the visible need for validation kept getting in the way of the recognition. There was something in the manner of the asking that made the answer harder to give. Then something shifted. Not in the work, in him. Somewhere in his late 20s, Hemingway stopped explaining himself, stopped justifying his stylistic choices to people who hadn't asked, stopped writing letters that could be read as pleading. He made a decision, or fell into one. The journals aren't entirely clear on which, that he was going to write exactly as he believed writing should be done, and the world could take it or leave it. He stopped trying. A few years later, the literary world that had kept him at arm's length was calling him one of the defining voices of the century. The stylistic choices they'd been skeptical of were now the thing everyone wanted to study and replicate. Nothing changed in the work. The work had always been what it was. What changed was the signal. The need was gone. And what came into its place, what people could suddenly feel in the work and in the person, was a kind of settled, unassailable authority that had nothing to do with approval, couldn't be given by approval, wouldn't have existed if he'd spent another decade trying to earn it. The respect arrived when he stopped needing it. That is not a coincidence. It's the mechanism. There's a term for what Hemingway stumbled into. Psychologists call it non-contingent self-regard, a relationship with your own worth that doesn't fluctuate based on whether the external environment is confirming it right now. It sounds simple, It is not simple. Because the default state for most people, especially people who feel things deeply, who care about relationships, who invest fully, is contingent self-regard, worth that rises and falls with external feedback. Identity that requires regular confirmation from the outside to feel stable on the inside. When your worth is contingent, you try. You have to. The alternative is the quiet terror of feeling worthless. And that terror is not something most people can sit with for long. So you manage. You perform. You accommodate. You work. And you send the signal. When your worth is non-contingent, when it's actually stable, regardless of what the room does with it, you stop trying in the old way. Not because you care less, because you don't need the result to tell you who you are. And people feel that immediately, without being able to articulate it or explain why. The social brain is extraordinarily sensitive to this signal. It reads it constantly, below the level of conscious awareness. Someone who knows their own worth, not as a performance, not as a front, but as a real internal state, produces a quality of presence that cannot be manufactured, cannot be hacked, cannot be produced by following a set of behavioral rules. You can't fake non-contingent self-regard. The nervous system sees through the performance every time, but you can build it. Slowly, honestly, from the inside out. I watched this play out with someone I know well. Someone who had spent years, really good years, real sincere effort trying to hold a professional relationship together through sheer reliability. Always available, always delivered, always the one who made things work without making a fuss about it. Never asked for recognition. Told themselves that wasn't the kind of person they wanted to be, the kind who needed to be seen doing good work. Just did the work. And for years, that reliability was taken as a given. The person on the other side didn't think about it because they didn't have to. It was just there, like gravity. You don't thank gravity. Then life got difficult in ways that had nothing to do with the relationship. And there simply wasn't the bandwidth to maintain the old level of availability. Not as a strategy, just as reality. Other things needed attention. The overfunctioning stopped, not because of a decision, but because there was nothing left to overfunction with. Something unexpected happened. The dynamic changed. The person on the other side, who had been comfortable taking the reliability for granted, suddenly had to reckon with the possibility that it wasn't permanent. That this was someone with their own interior life, their own demands, their own limits that had always existed but never been visible. The relationship became more mutual in 4 months than it had been in 4 years. Not because of a strategy, because the signal changed. Here's what this actually looks like in practice. Because it can't stay abstract. The shift from contingent to non-contingent self-regard doesn't happen through decisions or intentions. You can't think your way into it. You can't tell yourself your worth is stable. And have that be true, the nervous system doesn't respond to statements. It responds to experience. It happens through a sustained, honest process of repeatedly disconnecting your sense of yourself from the feedback loop. That means noticing specifically, in real time, the moments when you reach for the external confirmation, the moment you send something and immediately check if it's been seen, the moment you say something and scan the room for the reaction before you've even finished the thought, the moment you over-explain, add the extra qualification, offer the apology that wasn't necessary. Not judging those moments, just seeing them. Because each of those moments is the signal made visible. That's the old adaptation, activating the early learning that your presence requires supplementation to be enough. The child's solution running in an adult life. The work is to pause there, not to suppress the impulse, not to perform indifference you don't feel, just to hold the moment without immediately acting on it, to let the message be sent without checking the read receipt. To let the statement stand without the footnote. To let your presence be what it is without immediately moving to make it more palatable, more useful, more acceptable to whoever is in the room. That pause, repeated, honest, unglamorous, is where the internal shift actually happens. Not in a revelation, not in a single conversation that changes everything. In accumulated small moments of choosing not to reach for the confirmation, Each time you hold that pause and come out intact on the other side, each time you find that the room didn't collapse because you didn't over-explain, you give the nervous system new evidence. Evidence that you're okay, even without the confirmation. That your worth doesn't depend on what just happened. It accumulates slowly, and then one day you notice that something has quietly changed. Not that you've become cold, that you've become settled. The trying has reduced, not because you care less, but because you need less. And the difference in how people respond to that quality is immediate, consistent, and slightly surprising the first time you feel it. There's neuroscience worth knowing here briefly. Matthew Lieberman at UCLA spent years studying the neural basis of social pain, the way rejection activates the same brain regions as physical pain, with nearly identical intensity. His research helps explain why the need for external validation is so powerful and so automatic. It's not a weakness. It's not immaturity. For most of human history, exclusion from the group meant death. The social brain is wired to treat belonging as a survival requirement, which means the drive to secure it runs as deep as hunger. Working against that wiring isn't a matter of willpower. It's a matter of giving the nervous system enough repeated evidence that you can tolerate the discomfort of not being confirmed and still be completely intact on the other side. You build the internal stability the same way you build anything: repetition, sustained practice, accumulated proof. The version of you that exists on the other side of this is worth describing. Because it's easy to hear everything above and picture someone colder. Someone who has protected themselves by caring less, by closing down, by becoming strategically unavailable. That's not what this produces. The people who've made this shift are not colder. They're warmer, more honestly warm. Because the warmth no longer has anything to prove. It's not performing care in order to receive care back. It's not generosity deployed in service of securing an outcome. It's just actual warmth, unattached to result. They're still invested, still fully present in the relationships and the work that matters to them. But the investment comes from a different place, from something that feels more like abundance than scarcity, from real desire rather than anxiety about what happens if they stop. They set limits not as a power move, not as punishment, because they actually know what they need and what they don't, and those limits communicate something. Not coldness, not calculation, worth. They stop explaining themselves so much. Not because they've become arrogant, because they've stopped needing the explanation to land perfectly in order to feel okay about what they said. They show up fully when they show up, and they're honestly absent when they're not, because they're not managing the optics of their presence around the clock, not monitoring how they're being received in every room. And the people around them, without a strategy being deployed, without any behavioral game being played, respond differently. Not less feeling on the other side of this. More precisely feeling. Not less connection. More honest connection, from a place that can actually sustain it. Not less care. Care that finally comes from abundance rather than from fear of what happens if you stop. If something in this landed, if there's a recognition somewhere in what you just heard, there's only one thing I want to ask you. Where in your life is the trying the loudest right now? Not the caring, the trying, the effort that's running on anxiety rather than real desire. The place where you've been working to earn something that your presence should simply be allowed to hold. You don't have to fix it today. You don't have to make a decision or announce a change or do anything dramatic. Just name it. Privately, honestly, without judgment. That naming, that willingness to see the pattern clearly rather than continuing to operate inside it, is where the shift begins. Not in a single dramatic moment of resolution. In the quiet, honest recognition that you've been trying in a way that was never going to work. Not because you weren't trying hard enough. Not because you were doing it wrong. Because trying was never the answer. The respect you're looking for in relationships, in your work, in how you simply move through the world, it doesn't arrive through effort. It arrives the moment you stop needing it to. That moment is available to you, not as a performance, not as a strategy, as a real internal shift that happens when you finally stop supplementing your own presence, when you let yourself be there, fully, without apology, without the constant quiet work of making yourself more acceptable. Hemingway found it in his late 20s. After years of writing letters to rooms that weren't ready to hear him. You might find it sooner. Leave one word in the comments that describes the version of you who has stopped trying. Just one word. That's enough.